Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to this webinar, Test Automation for SaaS. Guarantee quality, avoid churn, and ensure success. My name is Ryan Thornton, and as product marketer, it is both incumbent upon me, an absolute pleasure, and a contractual obligation to lead you through this webinar, which will be lasting about 30 minutes. There will be a Q&A session at the end, so please do feel free to add questions in the Q&A, and we will be putting them to a man who's seated not too far away from me virtually. That is Mr. Mark Lovelady. He is our engineer without compare. It kind of works. Please welcome Mr. Mark Lovelady.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm just sitting here, Ryan, looking at these profile photos, trying to figure out which one's better. But if you do your poll at the end, we'll do that.
Okay, I'm quite happy to do a poll on which has got the better picture, Mark. My ego may become bruised at the end of it, but I'm sure I can take it. Now, nobody's as yet asked the age-old webinar question, to which the answer is yes. This will be being recorded and will be sent out to you sometime early tomorrow, so do not worry. And we'll just go and dive straight into the webinar itself. We are Virtuoso. Our tagline, ship happens faster with Virtuoso. And that's because we deliver what we're calling test hyper automation. That's really a kind of fancy way of saying that we've got natural language programming, robotic process automation, AI and ML driven, and we combine all that lovely new technology to provide you with hyper automation. And the biggest thing we do is we remove testing as a bottleneck to the modern software development process, which is scalable in the cloud. So SaaS, not going to go software as a service. And there are some specific challenges, which are common as well to lots of different software, but very, very common to software as a service. And I'm hoping that these all sound reasonably familiar. The need for speed, time to market is a real pressure for SaaS teams, which usually means that an agile methodology of some description is adopted, and anyone who has worked as a QA in a agile methodology knows just how difficult a squeeze it is to get those tests in sprint, and it just becomes a bottleneck, and is often, if not inevitably, problematic, that we're saying that can be changed. Complexity. Over the last 10 years, SaaS products have pushed the boundaries of what is possible, what can be accessed through a browser, has gone far beyond what was envisioned when the web was first introduced. The web wasn't designed with the applications and how dynamic they are that we've got today, which again makes it difficult for QA teams. And that dreaded word, churn, if we're not releasing quality software and users have a bad experience, churn is much more likely. So how do we square that circle of getting things out as fast as possible, things that are very complex, but also ensuring quality so that we get a good user experience and avoid that dreaded term, churn? Well, traditional solutions have kept that bottleneck. Manual testing, it works, but it's not scalable. So that's kind of a no-go. Frameworks, again, brilliant. Not to have a go against frameworks, but they're difficult to automate. They need engineering skill, and with that trying to get in sprint test coverage of 80% means that you're going to need lots of resources, and even then it's going to pose a challenge. Another is that your developers become your QA, and this isn't to say that developers shouldn't be doing a series of robust unit testing, but having them kind of check their own homework because there's just not enough people in the QA or resources there is not actually that great of idea. The other possibility is that your users become the QA, which if you're Netflix and you have millions of users, sending out a release to a proportion of them and letting them test it works. But for companies that are, got a larger cost and fewer users, it becomes quite risky to release untested releases and allow for the users to test them. So we are going to maintain, and I think Mark's going to do a much better job of it than I, that we've now got a real solution with Virtuoso, and that's because it's a codeless solution that works. There have been many false starts over the probably 2 decades now in codeless test automation. Often found that when it meets with any complexity, it all falls apart. We will, I hope, demonstrate that is no longer the case with the advent of Virtuoso. And we'll show you how to get in sprint test automation so that you are able to author and execute at such a velocity that testing is no longer a bottleneck, can happen simultaneously with development and can even happen before development. And to show that ongoing with your tests, they can be maintained through self-healing and other AI-driven tools. And so we do test across the entire SDLC, and Virtuoso is able to build tests in the planning stage. We can build from wireframes or requirements, perhaps written in BDD syntax, in BDD. The cucumber syntax just escaped me for a second there. We can also then run your tests the second the build is gone through CI/CD integration and just continually testing at all stages of the software development lifecycle, which I think quite neatly brings me over to Mr. Lovelady, who will be taking you through the actual juicy bit and showing how all this works in reality. Thank you, Mark.
Perfect. Cheers, Ryan. I'm going to start sharing my screen just now. And I'm going to just keep on going. I trust that's coming through now.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So Virtuoso, we're hosted in the cloud, so SaaS-based, which one means in terms of implementation is simply a URL you get, and that will take you to your dashboard. And it also gives us an element of scalability where we can start to run tests in parallel against different browsers. And we'll look at that shortly. But from the overall dashboard, another useful thing you can do is grant role-based access either to individuals or to teams for everything, or you could grant that access at the project level, where we think of projects as simply folders for your test packs, just different ways to organize your testing. So I'm going to drill into this one here. And within this, we have goals. You would think of goals as your test packs or regression suites containing test cases. The test cases, we call them journeys. And just before I jump into a journey or authoring, before I show you that, I will also mention that if you've got any applications hosted on a private network, we do have an application bridge allowing you to essentially route Virtuoso traffic over secure TLS into those private networks to test any locally hosted applications. Or for example, if you had locally hosted files or data you needed to use within your tests, we have ways to do it. So beginning here then, I'm going to use our live authoring feature, which essentially means that as I write the test, I'm going to get immediate feedback on the test steps that I write. So on the right-hand side, this is our live browser. On the left-hand side, this is our Virtuoso NLP natural language syntax. And the syntax I'll be using is from a concise list. It's not a huge dictionary of commands you need to learn. They're simple, they're plain English, and anyone can use them. You don't need to be technical. You simply need to understand how to browse through the application. For example, click on things, write in fields, and so on. Each of them have examples as well. So as a first-time user, you can literally write tests straight away. And then within about 1 to 2 weeks, you're going to be proficient, or you're going to be quick at actually writing those tests. So opening up my test here, we could do something like this. Mouse over product. So that's our NLP step authored. And then live on the right, you're going to see that interaction. So in this case, the mouse is hovering over product. Or it could be a click action. We could say click, get a demo. And the mouse will go in, or the bots will go in and then click on get a demo. Then we land on the book a demo page. Now, I already know in advance that this calendar form is within an iframe. And we have, even for non-technical people, easy ways to handle these, where we might say something like this, click on, and then I'll use the inspect element feature. So if you've ever used Chrome DevTools, it's similar to that. And I might pick, let's say 20 on this calendar. Again, that's within an iframe. Then on the left-hand side where I'm authoring the step, it's made the suggestion of the last picked element that I clicked on. Let me save that. And then automatically it's adding in the switch to iframe step. And then we click on 20. So you could also do this manually and just simply say switch iframe to iframe if there is one iframe on the page. But in this case, it has specified the specific iframe. So it's easy to author tests. Now, when you execute those tests for the first time, what the bots will do is they will collect screenshots. So you'll get before interaction and after interaction screenshots for every step. And we keep those for 12 months. And as well, they will also collect the element selector details and the element structure. So things like the XPath or the CSS. You obviously don't need to provide these. You can provide them, it is an option, but primarily you're going to be using the NLP and hints to identify elements. And where something's not clear, for example, you may have 2 buttons on the page with the same name. You could provide positional hints to say click on the top button, left button, right button, or what type of action it is, whether it's clickable or writable. And there's different ways to identify or guide the bots to different areas of the screen. But because we have these wider details like the selectors and the structure and the screenshots, the Virtuoso bots use these to build up a comprehensive model of the element, which means then when something changes, like the XPath or the CSS, or even if the language on the page changed, so you might write your test against a version of your application in English, you would be able to write that same test again or run the same test again on a completely different language. And the Virtuoso bots will be able to automatically self-heal those elements where the XPath changed or the language has changed. To demonstrate that here, as we scroll through this test of SAP, so this is the cloud version of SAP S/4HANA, you'll notice these Band-Aid or plaster icons. And this is where something has been self-healed. And there's a few. So if you think about a traditional script, you might encounter one of these changes like an XPath change. You would then need to go in and update the script and then run it again, only to encounter another change. So you would go in, and you would update the script and then run it again, and so on and so on. So with Virtuoso, we aim to eliminate that maintenance process, where you can see in this case, I've originally said click on yes. I ran the test. The bots collected the selectors, it collected the details, it built up this model, this comprehensive model of the element. So when we ran it for a second time and the application has actually changed, so that's now an add button, our bots were able to make an assessment and accurately determine that the add button is what was supposed to be clicked. And then it updated the element selectors and it updated the code and continued running successfully. And it's this type of self-healing that works in over 95% of cases, where real customers have actually come in and said, yes, this healing looks good to me. But at the same time, you don't need to do anything. You can just let it run in the background and trust that your tests are self-healing. And where something may fail, or there may be a false self-heal, for example, you can also run assertions. So you might validate after a certain step is ran that some piece of data exists, doesn't exist, or you could use assertions to validate any piece of data on the page. We've got different ways to handle different situations. But in either case, with the live authoring and the NLP authoring plus the self-healing, you're going to significantly reduce the amount of time it actually takes to write and maintain these tests. Now, on the other side of this is the ability to scale the tests, as I mentioned, running them in parallel, where you might, for example, have an e-commerce website. So I've run a search for a mug here, where I want to validate that each mug that we have in store exists on the page. So to do that, I've simply imported a test data table. This has been a CSV import. You could also populate this by API as well. And then for each product we have in our table, so for each row, I've said look for element $product name. So that's the name of the column within the table. It's simply going to run a test for each row now. So pigeon mug, NYC mug, brownstones mug, and so on. And these variables can be used for any command. So you may also use them to click on $product name. And then once you land on that product, validate that the product description is accurate and matches what is in the correct row for that product. So the description for example, the pigeon mug must match the pigeon mug description on the actual page we click on. So now you can think about scaling out your tests, doing 100 of these, 1,000 of these, and as well running them in parallel instead of doing one manually, for example. When it comes to running tests, if I move over here to the execution planner, you can create plans. So these plans are simply to say which test you want to run, which version of that test you want to run. So we keep a full version history when you author and run tests. We can choose to data drive that, as we just saw, and start to scale that out. But we can also scale it across multiple browsers. So you can choose from here essentially any modern web browser. So it could be Windows 10's Chrome, or it could even be mobile device browsers. We test web applications, so anything accessible via URL, either locally hosted or publicly hosted. We don't test native applications. So I just want to be clear on that. But in any case, you can add browsers into here and then run that on a schedule, hourly, daily, or weekly, and as well against different environments. So you may import your own credentials, your own URLs as variables and tie those to an environment, which means then you've essentially created one test, and that test can now run across multiple browsers, across multiple environments, and you don't have to rewrite it. Virtuoso will just take care of it for you. And as well, everything you see on this page can be configured or triggered via API. And that means when you start to get into your CI/CD and DevOps integrations, tests can automatically be run. Now, if you remember at the start of the presentation, Ryan mentioned that you could author tests based on wireframes. So for example, these are some Figma wireframes. You could author to say, click on add to bag, find €4 on the page. And literally you're using NLP to author the test, or you could do it based on Gherkin BDD requirements or any format really, where you're authoring against each individual line. So for example, here, when I can click on book a demo, in Virtuoso, that is literally click book a demo. So now that you've authored these wireframes, or you've authored your test from wireframes or designs, the test is ready to run before development's been complete. So as part of that CI/CD pipeline then, the test is waiting, it gets triggered and run immediately, and the developer gets immediate feedback. And that feedback could either be a pass or a fail result, plus a link to the execution, so the execution report. I'll look at that in a second. Outside of CI/CD DevOps tools, outside of that type of pipeline, you can also create direct integrations in Virtuoso where you may say something like, when a journey is executed and it has a certain outcome like a pass or a failure, then you could take other actions. Maybe it's to run another test because a previous journey was needed to prepare some data. Or it could be simply that when a journey fails, you might want to send a Slack message or post to GitHub or post to any webhook. And that pass-fail result will also contain a link to the report. This is the overall dashboard where you can filter this down and drill into tests that may have failed. So this one here is in red, that means it's failed. And the step in red, that's the failed step. Each step as well has its own unique URL. So you're literally linked directly to the failed step as part of the report, where you would get your root cause analysis tab. And that would contain your page source at the time the test ran, and the page network and console logs, plus a previous history of the step running. And if it passed before, you would also see a screenshot of what it looked like when it passed before. So you can easily compare against it and see what was broken. And you can add comments here. So that covers the core functionality of the tool. I'm also going to point out as well that we also have some API testing, very much like Postman, where you can import Postman collections, build out your API requests, map those requests to variables, and then reuse those API calls within your functional UI tests. So it may be to retrieve some data. So here we've got a simple JSON response. You could then parse that to check that for example, assert response.data.data.id equals 3588. So you can pull out the individual pieces of data from your API responses and then either validate that or store it in variables, meaning you can reuse it throughout your tests. So you've got your full front-end tests, your back-end test, and any APIs or microservices in between. So that covers everything I wanted to show today. So I'm going to stop there and open up for any questions that anyone has.
Yeah, so if you do have any questions, I've got a couple already in. Please do feel free to pop them in the Q&A and we will endeavour to answer them. In the meantime, just very quickly, I have a poll that I'm going to launch, and I'm launching it now. So in the interests of being streamlined, would you like a priority for a personalized demo? So would you like possibly Mark, possibly one of his colleagues, to get priority for that demo? If you would, then click yes, and we'll ensure that that happens. And I'm going to close that poll in 3, 2, 1. Too late is the cry. So thank you for that. And questions. Is it possible to upload a file to test?
Yes, we can certainly do that. As long as you provide a direct URL to the file, we can upload it from there. And if it's a local file, you would need to then run a local HTTP server to then upload that. But as long as you have the direct URL, it can be done with NLP commands.
Okay, question on cross-browser. Do you support non-Chromium Internet Explorer?
Yes, and we have, well, we use Browser Stack primarily. We can also integrate with Lambda Test. So that gives you your Internet Explorer, your old versions of Firefox, your mobile device browsers like Safari, Mac's version of Safari. So you've got the full range.
Okay, then the next question, I think the answer to this might be yes, but we'll need to dig into it a little bit more. When creating test data, can you connect to a database rather than CSV imports?
It's possible, and there's different ways to do it. We have some direct integrations with some types of databases, or it could be perhaps an API connection that we build out. For those types of questions, I think it's always good to chat to us directly so we can, understand exactly what you need to do there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Okay, doke. Any more questions? I think maybe Mark's covered everything. That's the point. But if you do have any more that you'd like to go in more detail, then it's always a good idea to go in. Will we share this presentation or video? We will indeed be sharing this. And do we have any videos to learn on the website? There is a resources section of the website. If I just come and have a little look here, Virtuoso and resources, videos. It's my internet. And yeah, we've got quite a lot of pages of videos, and we will be updating them quite often. So if that, well, one thing I do have to say is it's Gherkin syntax, not the pre-pickled version that I said it was at the beginning. So apologies for that. Which just remains for me to thank everybody for coming. I know that it's quite difficult to get webinars into people's very busy schedules, and there are a lot of competing ones. So thank you all for coming. I would like to thank Mark for being wonderful as ever.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks, everybody, for joining in.
Wonderful. And then it just remains for me to say ciao, ciao for now, and have a wonderful evening, morning, or whatever other time of day it is. Take care. Thank you.